the industrial age, what is that based on your humanities textbook? And now's your chance to start earning those participation points for today's class. On this.
You know, like, parenting with a student and stuff like that.
Perfect. Perfect image. Picture, or that refinery across the street. How does your textbook, what time frame does your textbook give for the industrial age, or the industrial revolution is another term?
18th century, late 18th century.
Good, and that's perfectly fine. For the purposes of this class, the 17 to 1800s is fine. And it really hasn't ended. In a sense, we're still in it. The industrial age connects with our class because it is also the time of the origins of modern Catholic social teaching, which is the substance, bless you, the substance of this course. So the industrial age, which is part of your humanities class, is also the time of the origins, the historical origins of modern Catholic social teaching. Of course, it goes back to the Bible, the original source of faith for many people in the world. But in the modern world, it's really the 1800s when Catholic social teaching originated. Again, this is need-to-know stuff for the final exam. We'll have a quiz on it next class. So do take detailed notes into your journal. I'm not going to judge or grade your notes, but you'll then take your journal home and study for the quiz, as well as having this to review for your final. I'm hoping this will also create fuel for the reflect part of your projects. Every class I'm teaching is different, so I don't know exactly what you're going to pull out of it. But as you write your final papers, when you write your final paper, you're going to need to draw upon some text or concept or principle or value from Catholic social teaching to explain why you chose the project that you chose and how it connected with social justice. So we'll start thinking about that today. Let's review a little bit. What does it mean to reflect? Julie? Perfect. You take what you see in the world and you compare it to your own moral values. That is absolutely perfect, so hold on to that. Okay. What social justice principles or values have you discovered as a class? We talked about these when you first shared with each other your experiences of injustice. And the question is, why was that unjust? The answer is a value or a principle. We've also gained some values or principles from some of the readings that we've done. Created in God's Image, Malcolm X's 1963 speech, Laudato Si. Some of the readings that we've done have given us values or principles. What were some of those? What ideas, what concepts tell you when something is unjust? Go back to the book, if you read the Living Justice textbook. What were some of the ideas you pulled out of there as you were working on your posts? Julie? Absolutely, certainly. Tatiana?
I don't know if I'm right, but are you talking about the dignity of the human person?
Perfect. That is the central value of Catholic social teaching, or or religious social teaching in general, the dignity of the human person. When that is violated, the situation is unjust. Poverty violates it. Sexual assault violates it. Human trafficking violates that. Discrimination of any kind, whether based on race or gender or sexual orientation, violates the dignity of the human person. So one of the keys, one of the ways we know that something is unjust is when someone's dignity is being violated. So because every person is created in the image of God, and that's a religious idea, therefore everyone should be treated with respect, and everyone is equal. That means that all forms of violence are unjust. All forms of discrimination are unjust. One of the keys. What is another value or principle that we've talked about over the course of the semester coming from any of our discussions? Or from the book?
The dignity of work, we talked about that when we did Susan Chavez.
Awesome. So the dignity of work and of workers is probably historically the original principle of Catholic social teaching. It was a pope, a Catholic leader, who was among the first to articulate the concept of a living wage or a minimum wage. That idea came from faith communities. Today we take it for granted. But in the past, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there was no such concept. Employers could pay whatever they want. And it's awesome that you connected that too with Cesar Chavez and the struggle of the farm workers. Good, so the dignity of work and of workers. How about your project of perhaps helping out at a shelter, an animal shelter? That's one of the projects on the table, right?
Not anymore.
What are the two?
We have
Baseball?
baseball and the gang violence.
Gang violence, okay. All right, so that's another class. Well, what about the principle connected with our work in the garden at the very beginning of the semester? Care for God's creation, so that's a third one. So we have to go beyond human beings and look at all life on this planet. And the idea that we've got to take care of it, and that's not just a religious principle, it's common sense. Because when we screw over the earth, remember, it comes back to bite us in the... Yes, thank you. I'm not going to say that on videotape, but that's right. Okay. So where do these principles or values come from? And the answer could be different for everyone.
From the family.
They might come from your family.
Culture.
As you grow and mature, however, you've got to call all of that into question. So your family may have raised you with a particular set of values. But as you become an adult, you need to step back and ask yourself, do I agree with those values? If so, why? And you've got to have a reason, to find reasons for yourself. Start exploring that as you begin to think towards your final paper. Do you believe in the dignity of the human person? Do you believe that poverty and discrimination are wrong? Why? And find answers for yourself. Devin?
I think that, like, there's probably, like, culture, like, your environment makes, like, what you believe in. For some people, a lot of people, it's, like, your morals that decide.
What's the difference between culture and morals?
Culture is, like, if you're, like, your environment and everything like that. And then I think morals is more of a religious thing, and more of like you think that because of the text or religion or whatever, you think that that's right or wrong. That's where you get that sense of right or wrong.
That's good. Hold on to that thought. Maybe even put that in your notes because that's really important. I'm trying to think of an analogy right now. It's escaping me. But it's kind of like the difference between apples and bananas and the concept of fruit. We know there are different kinds of fruits, right? Apples, bananas, grapes, kiwis, etc. But the concept of fruit is only one thing. It goes beyond any of those particular things. Not everyone believes that there are transcendent moral values, but for those who do, we believe that they go beyond culture. So culture can get it wrong. Society can get it wrong. And society has gotten it wrong, correct? We got it pretty dead wrong during the Industrial Revolution. And we're going to take a look at that today. So society can get things wrong. People who believe in moral values believe that those values go beyond culture and society, and in fact they critique them. So why was it wrong for women to be denied the vote? Why is it wrong for men to beat their wives? When this society accepted those things for several hundred years, now we know that's wrong. It was always wrong. It was never okay. Society and culture got it wrong. So for people who believe in transcendent moral values, we believe those values are eternal and they never change and they apply to everyone, no matter what culture or family you grow up in. Now, not everyone believes that. Many people today are relativists. They believe that society and culture define right and wrong. Devin?
But isn't it like scientifically it's like proven that like everyone, I wouldn't say everyone, aside from like mental health disorders, but like everyone has a like kind of a right and wrong that they understand. Yeah. Like, well, that.
Is it proven? There are two questions to ask. The first question would be, what does it mean to prove something scientifically? That's the first question.
I don't know if scientifically is the right word,
Okay.
but like we learned about this. Like I learned about this in high school. Like this was like a big whatever. And I'm trying to remember exactly, but it's like that was a big argument. Like it's like because we learned a lot about like apologetics, which is arguing.
You must have gone to a Catholic school.
Non-denominational.
Christian?
Yeah, Christian,
Yeah.
Protestant, mainly. But, so like apologetics, which is like super interesting to me, that class is really cool. But, we learned a lot about like, if you're in an argument, not an argument, but a discussion with like an atheist or something other, like the best way to win an argument is to concede as much as you can. So like for example, like the Big Bang Theory, like you say that 99% of the world came to existence in an instant. Like I believe that too, you know, like God spoke and there was, so we believe the same thing. And then like just like that sort of thing, like that's how to argue. And I think that in that thought, like I just forget how we get there.
Devin, I
Like,
think
right
that's
or wrong
great,
thing.
and I want you to explore this in your research summaries. Maybe go back to your notes from that class or whatever sources you can and put that in a research summary, because you're asking theological questions, and it's outstanding. And the only reason I'm cutting you off is that we have to move forward with the
Okay.
lecture, but let me just try this on for size. Be careful with the way we use the word belief. And then also think about the goals of a conversation. From a Catholic perspective, the goal of conversation is to find common ground. So you're not Catholic, or maybe you don't even believe in God, or you reject religion. Well, what can we agree on? I'm not going to argue against your perspective because that's not the point. The point is working together for justice. So where can we find common ground? The dignity of the human person. Most people will agree that every person has dignity and is worthy of respect, whether they believe in a God or not. So that's common ground we can agree on. Caring for creation is common sense, whether you're religious or not. So we can look for common grounds to have a conversation. And then another aspect of it is, let's be careful with how we use the word belief. I personally reserve the word belief for knowledge based on relationships of trust. Liz knows this from philosophy, we talked about it a lot. So I would say, I believe in God, and I believe my husband is faithful to me. There is no evidence, there's no scientific proof for either of those things. In fact, most men cheat on their wives. So my belief in my husband is a matter of personal trust. My belief in God is also a matter of personal trust. But when I'm thinking about the conclusions of the physical sciences, I do not use the word belief. I do not believe in the Big Bang. I think that it happened. I do not believe in evolution, but I think that it happened and continues to happen. I accept the conclusions of the physical sciences, absolutely, but it's not a matter of faith. So I think to avoid a lot of trouble, we can just be very careful with how we use the word belief. Scientists don't believe anything. They draw conclusions based on evidence. They make inferences. So scientists think that climate change is real, human beings are causing it, and it is having disastrous consequences. That's not a matter of belief. That is a matter of conclusions they have drawn from their research and the evidence. Last question, Devin, then we'll move on.
I was just gonna say that, like, that's not what I was taught at all. Like,
Right, and that's why the Catholic perspective is kind of different
Oh,
from
that's
other
the
denominations.
Catholic.
That's part of the equation. What we do share is we both believe in God, you and I. We both believe that the scriptures contain the Word of God, and we have to take the Bible seriously. And I think we probably would share the concepts of Catholic social teaching we would all agree on. Beyond that, I would love to have a conversation with you about apologetics. Because Catholicism has an apologetics tradition as well, but it's not the same thing as Catholic social teaching. Let's continue that. And the only reason I'm cutting it off is because that camcorder's rolling, and it's going to run out of battery if we don't finish up. And thank you so much for raising it. Love that conversation. So, again, why do you believe in values? You've got to answer that for yourself in your paper. There's no wrong answer. Write and speak about what you think, whether it's your family and how you were raised, or a faith, or a personal philosophy. You're going to have to write about your own values. I will ask you to engage in dialogue with Catholic social teaching and to include at least one of the readings that we've done, a reading you can find some common ground with, but it should be your values. And the last question is, what was missing from the book? It made me very angry. Living Justice, even after the guy revised it, left out one of the key concepts. What was it? Anybody pick up on it? You guys have already named it. He's got dignity of the human person in there. He's got the dignity of work and of workers, solidarity, rights and responsibilities, family, community, and participation, all these things. Andres?
was it care of God's creation?
Yeah! What did... You didn't put that in there. Give me a break. We all know about climate change and toxic pollution, and Pope Francis wrote this big encyclical about it, and he didn't put that in there. I don't understand that. Here's a cheat sheet for you. If you don't want to slog through the whole book, this website, and this PowerPoint is in Blackboard, has a summary of key concepts of Catholic social teaching that does include care for creation, and it has links to other documents you can look at on those issues. So life and dignity of the human person, call to family, community, and participation, rights and responsibilities, option for the poor and vulnerable, that one addresses poverty and the issue of poverty, dignity of work and the rights of workers, solidarity, that's standing together, we're one human family, that one can address the issue of migration, right? Waves of people who want to come to this country, well, they're our brothers and sisters. We don't just throw them out or throw up a wall. And then last but not least, care for God's creation. So that's a cheat sheet. That website, which I think is a little bit better than the book in a way, because it's got links for us. So now let's talk about the industrial age, which is really supposed to be the focus of the lecture, but thank you for the good conversation. Again, for the purposes, I think your book places the beginning of the Industrial Revolution at 1760. For us, 17 to 1800s is perfectly fine, so just that time frame. When you think of the industrial age, think 17 to 1800s. It really has to do with the shift from one way of life to another. So this is us in the garden, or some people from one of my classes in the garden, I think it's ours. Yeah, that's awesome. You guys really made a big difference out there. This was a whole way of life. Humans built our lives around a relationship with the natural world for much of human history. Farming, small businesses and crafts, making things by hand, villages, towns, and small communities. So this way of life defined much of human life for much of human history. Now, there have always been cities, but that relationship with the natural world was always there. The way of life based on the turn of the seasons, day and night, winter, summer, spring, fall. So the changes of the seasons, the changes of the day, People had a very keen awareness of these things. They were looking at the sky, looking at the stars, watching the sun and the moon and the patterns. People who spend time outdoors notice climate change much more than those who don't. They're seeing that this is the end of October and there are still green leaves on the trees. That is unheard of. It was unheard of 20 years ago. So having a relationship with the natural world was so much part of human life. So before the Industrial Revolution, for the most part, and this is almost verbatim from your textbook, humans built our lives around the natural world, the seasons, and families and small communities, agriculture or farming, small businesses and crafts, handcrafts, weaving, metalworking, carpentry and building, making clothing, building houses, homes. And we tended to live in villages, towns, and small communities. Bless you. Again, if you just walked in, you're taking notes on this lecture, you'll take your notes home to review for a quiz Thursday. This is a lovely image, at least in my view. It's lovely. I want to go see it, from the Art Institute of Chicago collection that you'll have an opportunity to see, I think, when you go on your field trip. It's a painting by an American painter which shows a pastoral view of the New England countryside. Thomas Cole, 1839, Art Institute of Chicago. If I get to go with you guys, I hope to see this painting. But then we get to this. It's a transition. And I love how, I think it was Andre Sue said, when I think of the Industrial Revolution, I think of the steel mills. Perfect. So it was a transition from that lifestyle based mostly on a connection with the natural world to machines and human manipulation of the environment. So this is by a Chicago artist in the 1930s. So here's a way to kind of summarize it. Some of the key characteristics of the industrial age. The primary concept is this: the shift from production based on manual labor to machines. And that's right out of your book, the Foundations textbook, Chapter 8. So that's the primary definition of the Industrial Revolution of the Industrial Age. People transition from working primarily in the home to working in a factory. So all of a sudden you left your home and went to a workplace elsewhere. And it was natural for people who had families to take their children with them. That was normal. It was considered normal for children to work on a farm. It still is in many communities. Why shouldn't they work in the factory alongside of their parents? So then you had children losing their arms and their legs and their fingers in machines. This is an image of a child standing barefoot on a machine that spins or weaves thread to make clothing, to make fabric in the 1800s. So from working in a home to working in a factory, from rural life to urban life. Remember the statistic from Story of Stuff. Globally, 200,000 people a day are leaving villages and farms to go to the city and look for work. So urbanization came with the industrial age, and it's still happening in many parts of the world dramatically, even here. People are still gravitating towards cities. When you got a whole bunch of people looking for a small amount of jobs, you have what's called a labor surplus. Too many workers for too few jobs. That's a good situation if you're an employer. So let's say I have a business making socks, because everybody needs socks. And I need 2 employees to run my machines. All y'all want a job. So I've got 20 people to choose from. What advantage does that give me? I can choose the best. I love that. So if somebody doesn't show up for work one day, sorry, you're gone. I'll take the next person.
You can make, you don't have to pay them as much, and you don't have to treat them as much.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I can pay you whatever I want, and you have to accept it. That is essentially what happens during the Industrial Revolution. Employers could pay whatever they want, and there was just a continuous stream of workers looking for jobs. So if somebody got injured, sorry, see ya. Take the next person in line, right? Or if somebody didn't like the wages that they had, they really had no choice. So labor surplus led to low wages and terrible working conditions. What we now call capitalism comes from the root word capital, which means investment. Capital is the money that you use to start up a business. If you're starting a small business like weaving cloth by hand, it doesn't take a lot of money. All you need is a few sheep, a spindle, and a loom, and you can make your own cloth. But when you're talking about a factory that makes cloth on a large scale, like with machines and people at machines, how much money do you need to start a business? And today you would need hundreds of thousands of dollars. Who has that kind of money? Any of you thinking of being entrepreneurs, starting your own small business? What do you want to do, Gilberto?
For me, probably a clothing brand.
Okay, so you want to make clothing. So let's say you're probably not going to buy your own factory. You're probably going to design it and hire a factory to do it. But you're going to need to pay that factory, wherever it is in the world, to start making your clothing before you can sell it. Let's say you need $50,000 up front. How are you going to get that money?
Probably a loan.
Yes, loans. So this is the essence of capitalism. Borrowing money to start businesses. Capitalism is an economy based on lending. That's our whole economy today. In one way, it's great because it levels the playing field. You or I or anyone can start a business or buy a home. In another way, it's not so great because it tends to concentrate wealth and ownership in the hands of a few.
It's dog eat dog.
It is. Well, that's the flip side of it, is there's a whole philosophy behind this. It starts with Thomas Hobbes, Robert Malthus, and continues to Milton Friedman. Those are the thinkers behind it. It's competition and survival of the fittest. It's kind of like taking Darwin's theory of evolution and translating it into society. Okay, so private investment and ownership in the hands of a few was the implication or the consequence of an economy based on lending. And this is what Devin means. Wages at the time were considered free agreements. So let's say Gilberto starts his company, and there are no laws telling him what to do. And he wants to hire 5 workers to help out. And he sits down with the workers and says, okay, I'll pay you $1 an hour. And the workers say, no, that's too little. So they negotiate an agreement, and maybe they come to an agreement on $2 an hour. Okay, we'll take that. That was the philosophy at the time. A wage was simply considered a free agreement between the owner and the owner of the business and the employees. But the employees really had very little bargaining power because so many people wanted those jobs. The result was massive poverty and suffering of the workers. Karl Marx, who wrote about working conditions during the Industrial Revolution, describes people who died on the job. So there's this woman working in a clothing factory. Her shift is just endless. She never stops working. They're giving her coffee and wine to keep her going. Coffee and wine, like an upper and then a downer, and she just died on the job. Or there were people who worked in bread-making factories who literally slept on the tables where they made the bread. They never went home. They just slept in the place. So Karl Marx goes into how horrible these conditions were. I think your Foundations book gives it 1 paragraph. Things were pretty bad. Okay. What's important for us is, and what people of faith started to realize, which was new, we never really thought about it before, was that these challenges were systemic. So a system is a whole conglomeration of parts that somehow work together. A car is a system. You've got the pistons, and you've got the drive shaft, and then you've got the transmission. All of that stuff works together to make the car run. So the economy, and we talked about this with the story of stuff, the economy is a system of all these parts working together. Machines, owners, investors, employees, natural resources that go into the production. It's all a big system, but it's the system itself that's causing the problem. So it's not a matter of individual morality. That's a debate you guys were having about abortion. Is that a social issue, or is it a matter of individual morality? Social justice, injustices, are not a matter of one person lying, stealing, or cheating, or breaking the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments don't even begin to cover this. It is the matter of a system that is unjust. Other systems that are unjust include suburban sprawl in Northwest Indiana, which results in economic and racial segregation. So we have an impoverished urban core, which is mostly people of color, and we have wealthy suburbs, which are mostly white. That is a system. it's not the fault of any one individual. So the person who decides to move from Hammond to Schererville so they can raise their kids in a better school system, they have every right to make that decision, but they're contributing to the system. So we're all part of these systems, and it's not a matter of individual morality. So it's the result of the way society as a whole works. Structures is another word for that. Hang on to that concept today. Catholics talk about structural sin. We're part of these structures that cause injustice, even if we're not personally doing anything wrong. None of us are doing anything wrong by driving to campus, but we're all contributing to climate change. We're part of a system that causes harm. We also, as your textbook points out, were at that time in the age of imperialism, when the Western, I say that with air quotes, countries, Europe and even the United States, were taking other people's land and resources, including slavery. As Annie Leonard puts it in The Story of Stuff, this is the third world, which some people would say is another word for our stuff that somehow got on somebody else's land. What does that look like? The same thing. You chop down the trees, you blow up the mountains to get at the minerals inside, you poison the water, you kill all the animals. And then you leave a bunch of indigenous people with no resources. Those people can then become your slaves, whether it's working in factories or being transported on ships to other countries for literal enslavement. I think Professor Pennon, who's also teaching humanities, is using this image with her students. It's a slave ship, you can see it in the distance, that's just dumping people overboard. People being treated like garbage, thrown into the sea. Have you guys seen that? So this is just straight out of The Story of Stuff. The Age of Imperialism, and it's also straight out of the Foundation's textbook, Chapter 8. Colonial powers, I quoted this from your book, including the United States, took land, people, and resources from poor nations. All of this is going on, still goes on, but really got started in the 17 and 1800s. Joseph Turner's slave ship, or slavers throwing overboard the dead and dying, from 1840. Alrighty, so people started to step up and respond, and one of the first people was Karl Marx. You ever heard of him? What do you already know about him? Emma? What do you know about Karl Marx already?
He defines society in two ways. The working class, that's called
Proletariat.
and then the people that own the business and own the labor.
Great. That's a really good description of what he says in Capital, and that was his, today we would call that social analysis. It was a way of seeing society, seeing the problem. That's really good. I should have put that in here, and I didn't. Put it in your notes. So, Karl Marx was a German philosopher who lived in the 1800s. He initially got his living as a journalist. He traveled from place to place in Europe and finally ended up in Britain. But as in that position, he was observing what was happening to the working classes, the terrible conditions and terrible treatment that people were suffering under during the Industrial Revolution. His most famous book is called Capital, Das Kapital in German, and it did exactly what Emma said. It critiqued capitalism. He told the stories of those workers, and then he analyzed the reasons for what was happening. He thought society was permanently divided into two classes, the working classes and the wealthy. He said that's been true throughout history. It has always been true. So his idea for making things better was the idea that the workers themselves should own the factories, not these wealthy capitalists. The workers should. And that was going to happen through revolution. The working classes would rise up and through violence take over.
It's like it's a cycle, right? He describes it as a cycle.
Yeah, he does. He looks at history that way. And yet he also believed that the cycle could come to a permanent end.
And it was socialism.
Socialism.
Which would lead to communism.
Absolutely.
So socialism is a stepping stone to a perfect world.
Yeah, he believed that a perfect world could come about if the workers would rise up and take over. Go ahead. Countries that, as you guys probably already know, did base their economies and politics on this philosophy included the old Soviet Union, today China and Cuba, embraced communism as a philosophy. Karl Marx, for the record, would not have agreed with the excesses that communist dictators went to, like Mao Zedong in China or Joseph Stalin in Russia. He would not have agreed with that. But he did think that the workers would need to use violence to overthrow the owners and take over. So he advocated, as you just said, class struggle and revolution. So this, as Emma said, the world is permanently divided into two classes, the workers and the owners. And they're always struggling against each other, and the only solution is a revolution. The workers need to fight to take over. His ideas attracted many workers. People began forming labor unions and were attracted to this philosophy because it made sense to them. He was also an atheist. Marx rightly criticized religion, especially Christianity. He wasn't criticizing Buddhism or Hinduism or the great religions of the rest of the world. He was really criticizing Christianity. He said, religion is the opium of the people. Anybody know what opium is? It's a drug. It is kind of a downer. It just makes you not care about the world. So someone who's on opium is basically just lying there on a couch. I don't know what they do, if they smoke it or they shoot up. Don't care about anything that's going on. I think it's related to heroin. He said that's how religion is. It makes people so fixated on going to heaven after you die that people stop giving about this life. They stop caring about what's going on in the world. All I care about is me getting to heaven after I die. That's all that matters. So religion becomes an opium or a drug that makes people not care about the world. So he was an atheist, and he rightly critiqued religion for that reason. It was Karl Marx, in a sense, as well as the suffering of the workers, that kind of made people of faith start to wake up and say, gee, maybe we ought to be concerned about what's going on here. And these were some of those people, the social Catholics in the 1800s who were lay people, ordinary people who were concerned about the suffering of the workers. Father Kettler was a German priest who dared to speak out from the pulpit. So during Sunday worship services, when he gave his sermon or his homily, he addressed the people who were sitting in his pews. Many of them were wealthy business owners. And he dared to criticize them and say, you've got to change what you're doing. He was among the first to speak out. He